Okay, everybody, here we are, for better or worse. Let's see if we can get the volume up just a little bit, maybe not. So we talked about, we go here. So we have a couple of examples of weird things that happen with voting, right? We think, okay. But we have the situation with the Condorcet paradox where we can vote and everyone can have transitive preferences, but the group as a whole has non-transitive preferences. And we have the example from the board account where you throw in irrelevant alternatives and it changes the outcome. Can we grab the doors in the back? Talking over the guys in the hall is a bit rough. Thanks a lot. Very, very helpful to me anyway. Oh, so much better. Life is good, life is good. So we have these examples, but they're really just examples, right? We know that, first of all, it doesn't always happen. We had a normal vote in the class and nothing weird happened. Can we get this one as well? Thanks. But also they were a little contrived in the sense that we only did majority rule voting. We didn't do, and there's lots of ways that you could do voting, right? You could, if you had 3 things, you could vote for the 2, and then you could have another runoff, and you could have all kinds of weird things. You can have the board account, you can have the Irish system. There's many, many ways to do voting. And it actually is a little bit encouraging because one system of voting had one problem, right? The majority rule had the non-transitive group preferences, and then the board account didn't have that problem, but it had another problem with the irrelevant alternatives, which the first one didn't have. And so it makes you think that maybe if we had a really clever system of voting, that we could solve this problem, right? And we could have a system where we could reveal everyone's preferences, and it might not be perfect, but it wouldn't have these weird paradoxical things, right? We would still have the general philosophical problem of should we allow 51% of the people to enslave 49% and this kind of thing, right? How to protect the rights of minorities and all of this. But at least we would be getting some sense of the preferences out of the voting. So that's very hopeful. And for quite a while, people worked on that. And they said, like, what kind of clever systems of voting can we have that can do better? And they managed to do better in some ways, but worse in other ways. They tended to get really super complicated. I give you the Irish voting system as an example right there. But everyone that was simple enough that we could get our heads around still had these sorts of problems that came out. And then along came Mr. Arrow. And Mr. Arrow ruined it for everybody. Everyone was getting perfectly good work done, doing these examples, and everyone was getting tenure, and they were getting jobs for life based on this stuff. And then Mr. Arrow came along, and he said, no. It's really any rank order voting system is going to have problems. So whatever voting system that you use is always going to have these weird paradoxes. As long as you're getting everyone together and they're ordering their choices in some way, perhaps insanely complicated, perhaps simple, you're always going to have the possibility that these weird paradoxes occur. So he worked in a very, very general framework. So for example, he has any number of voters, as long as it's more than 2. 1 makes no sense. 2, obviously, nothing interesting happens with voting with 2 other than fistfights. And so you really need 3 to even have a story anyway. Any number of possible choices, again, bigger than 2. Right? So if you have only 2 things that you're choosing from, there's voting systems that can get you what you want, like in a reliable way. But if you have more than 2, we're going to have problems. And then he has some requirements on the voting system. So he's going to have all the individuals in there have transitive preferences. Our normal utility. If I like A bigger than B, more than B, and I like B more than C, then I like A more than C. Okay? The thing we've assumed in economics since day one, we're going to have that. Now, if you talk to psychologists, that's a bit iffy itself. And if you look at behavioral economists, there's some reason to think in some situations individuals don't have transitive preferences. But for the vast majority of things that we talk about in economics, it seems more or less reasonable to a lot of people. It may sound reasonable to you, it may not. It depends on how you've lived your life and what kind of weirdos you've encountered in your travels. But this is up for debate as well. But we're going to have here ordinary people, ordinary economic people, where they have transitive preferences. So they're all well behaved in our sort of economic sense. And then we're going to require a couple of things, and we're going to look for a voting system, some kind of thing where everyone puts down their preferences in some way. And we're going to look for it to have a number of properties. And the properties we want is we want it to not be a dictatorship. So one way that you could do it is that we're all going to vote, and then whatever Ivan wants goes. Right? That's a perfectly good voting system. It's a rule for how we decide. Everyone puts down all their preferences, everybody votes, and then we just take Ivan's first choice, then we do that. Okay? We're not going to allow that because it's not really what we're after in voting. And by this he means it very generally, in that maybe Ivan almost always gets his first choice, but there's some possible state of the world somewhere where he gets his second choice. Okay? There's some situation where the lot of you can override my first choice and make it something else. Okay? Doesn't have to be often. I can be almost a dictator, but it has to happen sometimes. We want our voting system to come up with a transitive ordering for reasons we've discussed. And we don't want the Condorcet paradox. We would like it to have independence from irrelevant alternatives. So if we put something in there that has no chance of winning whatsoever, it shouldn't switch the order that we get. Okay? And it should be monotonic in the sense that if people want more of something, and everyone wants more of something, we should get that. Right? It should be Pareto efficient, which is very similar. Right? We shouldn't be getting something that everyone hates when we could do better, make everyone better off. And that's it. Now there's many, many versions. This is not Arrow's original version. These are just the ones that are sort of straightforward to understand. There's many versions where they change out these things for other things. Pareto efficient is usually there, but there's usually a couple other things. Arrow did it, he got super famous, everyone was horrified, and then everyone came at it from different directions and made better, simpler proofs and had various conditions. So if you look up Arrow's Impossibility theorem, you'll get different lists of the things that are required because there's about 47 different versions of the theorem at this stage. Okay? If you want to see how he goes about proving this thing, you can take a look at the book, page 767. Actually, that's not how Arrow proved it at all. Well, not at all, but his was much longer and more involved because he was doing it first and he had to figure it out on his own. And people have simplified it since then. Okay? The interesting thing to look at there is how little assumptions get made to do this. About the voting system, for example. It can be any voting system where we put down our orders and that we can do anything with them whatsoever. Okay? And what he finds, and they all find, is that there is no voting system. In complete generality about what a voting system is, no matter how complicated, no matter how simple, there is no voting system that can give us all these desired properties. It just does not exist. There's always going to be the chance of these paradoxes. So whatever system you have, there's always the chance that weird things are going to happen. Now, they might not happen all the time. They might, we don't know. We don't know how common they are, how rare they are, but there is no voting system that can guarantee you that you won't get the kind of things that we saw in the Condorcet paradox and in the board account problems. It just doesn't exist. Now, he liked to think about it as the possibility theorem, that there's always the possibility that weird things happen, which is, I think, probably a more accurate way to think about it. Right? No matter what voting system you have, it doesn't mean that crazy things are happening every day, but for some issues with some preferences that people might have over those issues, you can get weird things happening. Okay? Now, one is tempted, therefore, to say, well, okay, it could possibly happen, therefore, but it's not necessarily very common, so we can just ignore it. But the thing is, we don't know how common it is. Right? I know when I vote over exam dates that I have never seen the Condorcet paradox in real life with actual students, but that just might be the particular problem I'm bringing to you guys. It might be completely different from the problem of should our city have a sewage treatment plant or a water purification plant or a new fire department. right? It could be completely different from that. We don't know. And it could be that it's common in committee meetings. We just don't know. We don't know how common any of these things are. All we know is that they're always possible. Okay? Sad but true and very depressing. Okay. So that's Arrow's impossibility theorem. I thought about going over the proof with you guys, but it's like a 2-week process to go over the proof, and it didn't seem like there'd be that much interest, so we're gonna leave it be. It's a very brief little lecture, but I can't impress on you how much this changed post-war political science. Like, this is a huge result. We cannot trust voting to reveal preferences in sort of the kind of way we naturally assume it would. Right? You can get these weird paradoxes. You can get the circles of I like A better than B, and B better than C, and C better than A, and A better than B, and that kind of thing. And these things are always possible. Okay. So it's super important. I don't spend time on it because we've seen it in 2 examples, and you just need to know that that is way, way more general than those examples.